This is a different, not different, but we're talking about wisdom. And starting in verse 7, it says, "My son, keep my words and store up my commands within you. Keep my commands, and you will live. Guard my teachings as the apple of your eye. Bind them in your fingers and write them in the tablets of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister." Now, when you look at wisdom, why do you think that it's always in a feminine? Why is it always feminine? What's your thought? Austin, what do you think? You're trying to pick me up. Okay. All right. What do you think? Why is it always in a feminine? Go ahead. What? How's that? Okay. Any thoughts? Paul, you look like you're really intent, you know? No? I don't know. What do you think? Yeah. Yeah. What do you think that is? Um, I guess could be, but like ships are always feminine. I'm not sure why it is that way. Jay, what do you think? Why is wisdom always used in a feminine wisdom? We're talking about wisdom. Okay. Okay. Good. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Maybe women have more intuition than men. I don't know. More wisdom, yeah. They're wiser than men. Sometimes they are. So just a thought, yeah. We're in Proverbs 7 is what we're looking at. It says at the window, verse 6, "At the window of my house I looked out through the lattice, and I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men a youth who lacked judgment, lacked wisdom. He was going down the street corner, walking along the direction of her house at twilight as the day was fading, as the dark night set in. Then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute and with crafty intent. She is loud and defiant. Her feet never stay at home. Now in the street, now in the squares, at every corner she lurks. She took hold of him and kissed him, and with her brazen face she said, I have fellowship offerings at home. This is what tripped me up. It's talking about this woman who's a prostitute. But then in verse 14, it says, I have fellowship offerings at home. Did any of you look into that? I'm not sure what that would have meant. It just a footnote says peace offerings, but I didn't look into that. Any thoughts? No? Okay. Yeah, maybe so. I hadn't thought about that, but that could be what it is. Yeah. Or maybe not living accordingly. Could be. I don't know. Yeah, it says today I filled my vows, so that might be it. That she did if I do this, then I'm in good shape. Could be. Yeah. Then I can go live life. Yeah. It's kind of like when you look at some of the mobs, they're very much you got to do what is right as far as the church, but then they can go do anything that they want because they're very much, you wouldn't defile something of the church or something like that. If somebody's a priest, you couldn't kill them, but if somebody isn't a priest, then it doesn't really matter. That's kind of what you get from mobs and things like that. Let's see. Yeah, she goes on to say how her bed is and everything, and then verse 19 says, "My husband is not home. He's gone on a long journey. He took his purse filled with his money, and he won't be back home until full moon." So I guess she says, he's gone, so I can do what I want. So with persuasive words, she led him astray, and she seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once he followed her like an ox going to slaughter, and a deer stepping into a noose, till an arrow pierced his liver. I thought that was interesting words. An arrow pierced his liver. Like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. Now then, my sons, listen to me. So here's where he's saying, listen, I really have something to say to you. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. So, like said many times, you need to stay away from what is evil. Don't get tempted. If you're an alcoholic and have problems with drink, don't go into a saloon. You gotta stay away from those. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading to the chambers of death. So David is saying, this is David, yes, I think it was David, was saying, please just hear my words, stay away from what is evil. All right, there was just a couple questions I want to talk to. But let's go to Mark. We're 15th chapter in Mark was our lesson. Now, 14, we weren't here last Sunday, but 14 talks about when Jesus was arrested, and this is titled Before Pilate. Very early in the morning, the chief priests and elders and the teachers of the law and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision. I think they probably had reached a decision before this. They bound Jesus and led him away and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing of you." Stop right there for a moment. Have you ever been accused of something that you hadn't done? I know I was already. When I was a kid in high school, our bus wasn't very full, and there were some kids that they would take rubber bands with spitballs and they snap them at each other. And I didn't do this. I really just wanted to be not to get in trouble, I guess is what it was. But they would do this, and one day, one of the guys who um, normally plays football, he was on our bus, and he normally was not on our bus, and he instigated this whole thing, and he was snapping these things and snapping these things, and everybody else was helping. And one of these, he went and snapped one of these things, and it hit me in the back of my head. Now, I wasn't bald at that time, so it wasn't as bad as it could be now. But uh, and I said to somebody, "Give me that rubber band. Give me a rubber band." So they gave me a rubber band, and I went to snap. I stood up, turned around, and went to snap this rubber band, and the bus driver yelled, "Sit down." So I sat down, and before that, guys were up and around and moving around. And the next, that was a Friday, I think. The next Monday, everybody had us, all the guys that were involved in this had to sit in the front couple rows, and we had to sit together. We never sat together because we all had our own seats before that. And just because I had stood up and acted, I mean, I was going to shoot it, but I didn't. And so I was a little upset with that I was not doing that normally, but just at that one time, I got caught. And so that didn't make me feel very good. But there's a lot of, there's a lot of people that have been found guilty by a jury of something that they have not done. And in the past number of years with the new DNA findings, they're finding that people have been in prison for long periods of time for something they have not done, and they are released. And so, yeah, Jesus, he did not, Jesus didn't say anything, and he says, "Aren't you going to say something that you're accused of?" Well, if you're not accused of if you're accused of something you didn't do, normally you're not silent. Normally, see, I did not do that. But Jesus here just kept silent because everybody knew he didn't do the things that he was accused of. So the flesh part of him could have said, I did not do this, but he knew his destiny. So he just kept silent. Have any of you been accused of something you hadn't done? Like to say? Okay. Still, but Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Yeah, I'm sure he was amazed because if this crowd was accusing him of all sorts of things, and he was not guilty, and Pilate knew this, and he said, "Aren't you going to say anything?" Now it was the custom of the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison for insurrection who had committed murder and an uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. Now, I was thinking about this. I'm not sure why they wanted him. I'm sure he was probably a Jew. Barabbas was a Jew. And they wanted Pilate to release somebody, but I don't think they really cared who. But why do you think they chose Barabbas? I was thinking about that. And Barabbas, after he was chosen, how do you think he felt that here was a man, Jesus, who was taking the punishment for something he didn't do, and Barabbas was being released just because he had committed a crime. How do you think Barabbas felt? Do you think he had compassion for Jesus? Did you ever think about that? I mean, here's a man that was probably going to be killed. And just, yeah, I'm sure he did, but man, after he found out and found that this man Jesus was going to probably be killed, he didn't know at this point. But he must have been, I mean, do you think he wanted to go up and thank Jesus for doing what he was doing? I don't know. Yeah, I agree. I don't know. And maybe Pilate thought that if he chooses this man Barabbas, who was the vilest of the vile, that they would say, no, we don't want him. We'll let Jesus go. No, we don't. Hmm. Well, he was in prison for insurrection, which would have been an uprising against the Romans. So I'm sure he was a Jew. Yeah, so interesting. Any other thoughts? Hmm. Hmm. Right, right. Well, it says that, yeah, somewhere I think it says that he wanted to please the crowd or whatever. Yeah, it might be. Uh, no, in verse 15 it says, wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. Then he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. And after Barabbas heard this conviction, he I have can't can't think of how he would have felt. But here was a man who is going to go to death and going to uh, be killed, where here's where Barabbas was released. So he was the first that was released from death, but physical death, where because Christ died, we are released from death. Not a physical death, but a spiritual death. We're released from spiritual death. So he would have been released from, and did Barabbas, after he was released from his physical death, did he believe that Jesus was the Christ? We don't know, but you would have thought that after all this had happened, that it certainly would have changed his life. We have no way of knowing. Verse 16, any other thoughts on that? Verse 16. A soldier led Jesus away into the palace and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put on a purple robe, and they twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And he began to call out, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff, and they spit on him. Falling to their knees, they paid homage to him. When they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to be crucified. These soldiers, there were some soldiers that had gone along with the Jews to arrest Jesus. They needed the soldiers to do the arresting, I guess. I'm not sure how that all was with the Jewish law and the Roman law. But when they had taken Jesus back with the chief priests and the scribes and the Sanhedrin, it doesn't seem like there was any Roman soldiers around. But now again, after Pilate sentenced him to death, then the soldiers took over. The Roman soldiers took over. It seems like they just enjoyed what they were doing. They enjoyed seeing a person, or Jesus in this case, suffering and mocking him and putting on this crown of thorns to make him look like he was the king. It's hard for me to, and I guess part of it's because I have Christ's love, but excuse me. But it's hard for me to think that you would treat anybody like that, no matter who they would be. But again, thinking about Christ's love, I guess we can't feel like some people that have been doing very bad things, treating people so badly. But he certainly was being treated badly, and then making fun of him, paying homage to him, and it's hard to comprehend what was happening and why they would have done that. Verse 21 says, "A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing his way from the country and was forced to carry the cross." Now, I did not look into this at all, but I assume that in Jesus' physical condition, he probably could not carry the cross because he was already beat very badly. And so I assume he had carried it part way, but he couldn't carry it the whole way, because John, in the Gospel of John, it says that Jesus carried his cross. But in the other Gospels, the other three Gospels, I think it says that Simon carried the cross. So he probably was in such a weakened condition that he could not carry the cross. And I used to think that carrying this big cross, was a real problem. But they did not carry from what I found in reading, that they did not carry the whole cross. It was just the cross beam that they carried. So it would have been the cross beam that they would have carried. So anyway, I think that probably in his weakened condition, he could not carry that. It says in verse 22, they brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, which just had been outside the city of Jerusalem. And I did not look into this, but I'm not sure if it's across the Kidron Valley. Dale, you would know where this Golgotha is. You've been there. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. But it's very close to Jerusalem. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh. He did not take it. And they crucified him, dividing up the clothes. They cast lots to see what each would get. I guess this was a normal tradition for the soldiers to divide up whatever. I don't know, but I don't know if this was special uh, for Jesus or not. But I assume that the soldiers could have whatever they wanted that was on the person being crucified. Doesn't say here, but I know in one of the Gospels it talks about his undergarment was made of one piece, so they did not want to cut that up, and they cast lots for that. Then it was the third hour when they crucified him. So you got to remember this was in the middle of the night when he was arrested, and then all this happened overnight. And this is at 9 o'clock in the morning when he was taken out. So I don't know how long it took to take him out to be crucified, but it would have been fairly early, 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. They crucified two robbers with him, one on the right and one on the left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, come down from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Yes, on him. So they're seeing Jesus on the cross, and they're hurling insults at him. And the chief priests and teachers, they are so sure that they arrested someone that should have been arrested, because they feel that they are right in their thinking that this guy would, Jesus would take away from their religion, and now he's gone. But what I thought was so interesting, it says that if he came down from the cross, that we may see and believe. Now, how many of the miracles that Jesus had done had they seen? Many, I'm sure. They heard about it. They saw the crowds following him. They knew what he was doing. They must have thought that this must come from God. And the stories, I'm sure the stories like if Jesus was walking on the water to the disciples, I'm sure the disciples didn't keep that to themselves. They would have talked among all the people and say, "You wouldn't believe this, but he actually walked out on the water." And Peter said, "He told me to come to him, and I started walking in the water, but then when I lost sight of him and saw all the waves, I started going down, and he reached out and picked me up." Surely stories like that must have been going among the people. They had to be. I mean, if you would have heard a miracle, I mean, it would have been in the news. It would have been in the effort review for sure. There's not much in the effort review these days. Uh, but, but those things would have gone like wildfire, you would think, even though the communication isn't what it is today for us, but it had to be talked about. And surely the Sanhedrin, the Jewish leaders, they knew what was happening, but they were concerned that this is going to destroy what they were looking for. It was going to destroy their religion. And so they had to know about these miracles. But they said, if you come down, we'll believe you. We'll believe you are the Messiah. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did. Yeah. And the next verse is what I thought about. At the 6th hour, no, wait here, it's not the next verse. The whole land, no, wait, let me start. Verse 33. At the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me? Then some of those standing near heard this, and they listened. He's calling to Elijah. One man ran and filled a sponge with wine vinegar and put it on a stick and offered it for Jesus to drink. Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes down. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. Then verse 38 is what I wanted to talk about. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. If they hadn't had any doubts before, for no reason at all, this curtain in the temple, the veil to the Holy of Holies, from what I have read, this was quite a curtain. I mean, this is a heavy curtain. And for no reason at all, this curtain tears from the top to the bottom, revealing the Holy of Holies. And you would think that if they had any doubts prior to this, they would have said, oh, maybe there really was something about this. And the darkness, the way the atmosphere was, getting dark, and I can't imagine how people were thinking, feeling about this time, and they could have really thought maybe this really was Jesus, who he really thought he was. I don't know. Any thoughts? Go ahead, Dale. I'm sorry, you listened to who? Oh, okay. Yeah. Hold on.
In the talk, the person asked the question, how do you feel when you're wrong? And I thought, that's an interesting question. And so people began to answer, and they said, you feel bad, you feel sorry, And she said, no, you're answering the wrong question. She said, you're answering the question, how do you feel when you find out you're wrong? And she said, how you feel when you think you're wrong is that you're right. And that was pretty perceptive. And when we read this feels like a very heinous account of how somebody treated the Son of God. They were wrong, but thought they were right. And we see that in the world around us, where, people who do not align with us, they think very differently. You read their blogs, you read their comments online, whatever, and you realize that people see this completely differently. And I think that's a tremendous challenge for us, but it helps us understand what happened. I mean, you look at Apostle Paul was killing Christians before he was a Christian. So I don't think we should be surprised by this. I read just recently there's around 10,000 martyrs a year for the sake of Christianity in our world. 10,000. And, it's a little bit mind-bending to get your head around that and realize that suffering and the way of Christ runs contrary to the way of the world. And the way of the world is going to be mob mentality, self-preservation, and how do we get things done our way? And that's a conflict that is going to rage as long as Christ tarries and doesn't return again.
And how will all those Jews feel when Jesus returns and they find out that he is the Messiah? And they're going to say, we were wrong all this time. We could have lived our lives totally differently than what we have. Any other thoughts on that? Verse 39, and when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. So he realized who this was. This is a centurion. And you wonder how his life was impacted. What changed in his life after this incident? Did he join up with the disciples, with the apostles? Did he become one with the believers? I believe he did. Just from what he said. Verse 40. Some of the women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. So it talks about all these women being there. And it's interesting, you don't see anything about the disciples. They were probably all dispersed, except John. We know about John, but had they gone out? Were they looking from a distance? It's hard to say. Verse 42. It was preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council, who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. So here was one of the council that was a believer and we don't know where he was before this. I mean, did he just believe just lately, or was he following Jesus before? Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead, and summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So Joseph brought some linen cloth, took down the body, and wrapped it in the linen, and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph saw where he was laid. Again, back to you, Dale. You said you saw where possibly was the tomb. I was often curious about the rock. Is there a rock there? Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I was often wondering how big this rock was. How many people would it take to move this rock? And so So, yeah. Yeah, it would have had to be. Yeah. Right, to roll it away. Yeah. So, any other thoughts on this section? On the chapter? Go ahead. Tell you what, let me bring this over.
When I read the footnotes, there's over and over again it said that this was done to fulfill, and then it's someplace in the Old Testament. So God had everything lined up, and everything had to be fulfilled. So that's another miracle.
Yeah, there are many miracles, and this was written thousands of years before. You know, these fulfillments have been written about many times before. Well, there are many people today that are still looking for miracles, looking for the Messiah to come. And there are many miracles still happening today. But many people do not believe because the miracle hasn't been done to them or they haven't seen it. Just like the council say, you know, if you come down from the cross, we'll believe. And that's the way many people are. Say, we won't believe unless this happens. But it's called faith for a reason. That we need the faith. We need to believe what had been seen. And historically, we watched a movie some time ago. I think John was that with you and with you folks about this person that did not believe, and he was a journalist in Chicago, and he went to wanted to make sure once and for all prove that this whole thing about Jesus is a fraud. And I forget what it was called, a miracle. No, Case for Christ, yeah. Lee Strobel, yeah. Lee Strobel, Case for... Did you see that? No. We never watched that, and we talked about it, but we never did. But he sets out to saying that this could have never happened. And Lee Strobel, he went all across the United States to talk with different people that have been, that are an authority of certain things, and he said, and his wife became a believer, and he wanted to prove that she was wrong, and so he set out for a year to do this, and everything scientifically proves that Christ died just as it is written, and finally he believed. So, yeah. So if you look for, and if you look at the facts, and see what historically has been proven, there can be no doubt. There can be doubt, but you should not doubt because it is the truth. I don't have anything more. Does anybody have anything else to say? No. Thank you. Sorry. Prepared to teach, but to lead, but hopefully I just enjoy discussion with the scriptures. Thank you.